We call it a lost city. The people who built it never lost it at all. You know the image. A city of gray stone riding the spine of a mountain, wrapped in cloud, with green peaks falling away on every side into a river gorge far below. Machu Picchu. Perched almost 8,000 feet up in the Andes of Peru, on a narrow saddle of rock between two summits, in a place where no city has any business standing. And here is the first strange thing. The Inca who built it had no iron tools. No wheel. No draft animal strong enough to haul stone up a mountain. No mortar to glue the blocks together. And no written language to plan any of it. Yet they raised a city here that has stood for over 500 years, through earthquakes that flattened Spanish churches in the valleys below, on a slope so steep it should have slid into the river long ago. For 100 years, we have told ourselves a simple story about this place. That it was a lost city, hidden and forgotten, abandoned in fear as an empire collapsed. But the closer you look at the stones, the less that story holds together. So sit with 3 questions. How do you build an earthquake-proof city, out of stone blocks weighing tons, on the edge of a cliff, without iron, without the wheel, and without a single word of writing? Why put it here, in one of the most difficult places on the entire continent? And if it was never truly lost to the people who built it, then what exactly were they hiding, and from whom? This is the story of the city in the clouds, and the empire we underestimated. Chapter 1. The city that shouldn't be there. Start with the location, because the location is the first impossible choice. Machu Picchu sits on a ridge in the eastern slopes of the Andes, where the high mountains begin to drop toward the Amazon. On 3 sides, the land falls away in near vertical cliffs to the Urubamba River, curling in a loop almost 2,000 feet below. The only flat ground is a thin strip along the top, and even that had to be carved and propped into place by hand. This was not an accident of geography. The Inca chose this spot on purpose, and building here meant fighting the mountain for every square foot. The problem is water and gravity. This is a cloud forest. It can receive close to 2 meters of rain a year, and rain on a steep slope means one thing: landslides. A heavy city built on loose mountain soil should, by every rule of engineering, slump and slide off the ridge within a few seasons. It has not moved in 5 centuries. And the reason is hidden underneath it. Before the Inca laid a single famous wall, they built the part no tourist photograph ever shows. They terraced the entire slope, cutting the mountainside into wide stone steps held up by retaining walls. And beneath those terraces, they layered the ground like a filter. Large stones at the bottom, then smaller stones, then gravel, then rich soil at the top. Rain falls on the city, sinks down through the soil, drains through the gravel and rock, and runs safely away, instead of pooling and turning the whole slope to mud. Archaeologists estimate that well over half of the construction effort at Machu Picchu is invisible, buried below the surface as foundations and drainage. The Inca spent more work on the part you cannot see than the part you can. They were not just building a city. They were building the mountain that could hold it. And they chose this exact ridge for reasons beyond defense. To the Inca, the mountains themselves were living gods, the Apis, and Machu Picchu sits cradled among sacred peaks, with the river curling below like a protective ring. It stood at the meeting point of the high Andes and the green Amazon, a threshold between 2 worlds. This was not a random hilltop. It was, in their eyes, one of the most powerful places on Earth, and they built to match it. And on top of that engineered ground, they raised the stone. Which is where Machu Picchu stops being impressive, and starts being genuinely hard to explain. Chapter 2. The stones that lock together. Walk up to the finest walls at Machu Picchu, the ones around the temples and the royal quarter, and something about them feels wrong to the eye. The stones are enormous, some weighing several tons. They are not rectangular bricks. They are irregular, many-sided blocks, each one a different shape, and they fit against their neighbors so tightly that after 500 years you still cannot slide a knife blade or even a sheet of paper into the joints. No cement. No mortar. Just stone locked against stone, so precisely that the seams almost disappear. This style is called ashlar masonry, and the Inca were the greatest practitioners of it the world has ever seen. But how do you shape a 10-sided boulder so perfectly that it kisses 5 other boulders along every edge, using tools of stone and bronze, with no steel chisels and no written measurements? And they did not haul most of this stone up the mountain at all. They quarried it right there. On the slopes of Machu Picchu itself sits a field of granite, split straight from the bedrock, and you can still see half-worked blocks and the natural fracture lines the Inca followed. To break a giant stone, they are thought to have driven wedges into cracks and worked the rock apart along its grain, then shaped each piece where it lay. The mountain was not just the site of the city. It was the supply of it. The labor came from the empire itself. The Inca ran a system called the mita, a rotating labor tax, in which communities across the realm each sent workers for a set time to build roads, terraces, and temples for the state. There were no slaves in the way we picture them and no money either. Instead, tens of thousands of ordinary people cycled through these projects, fed and housed by the state, leaving behind work of a quality that money alone rarely buys. The honest answer to how they cut the stone is that we are still working it out. The leading picture goes like this. Harder stones, river cobbles and hammerstones, were used to pound and peck softer rock into shape, hour after hour, gradually grinding a block down until it matched the gap it had to fill. Workers likely tested a stone against its neighbor again and again, marking the high spots, lifting it away, grinding it down, and lowering it back, over and over, until the fit was perfect. Some blocks even have small nubs and grooves left on them, thought to be handholds and levering points for moving them into place. And they did not stop at making the stones fit. They made them survive. Look closely and the great walls lean very slightly inward as they rise, and the doorways and windows are trapezoids, wider at the bottom than the top. Individual blocks are often subtly rounded and locked with interlocking joints. All of this is earthquake engineering, done by eye. When a quake hits the Andes, and they hit often, the stones of an Inca wall are said to dance. They jostle and bounce against each other and then settle back into place, because nothing is rigidly cemented and everything is shaped to hold together under stress. The Spanish saw it happen. When earthquake struck Cusco, the old Inca capital, colonial buildings cracked and collapsed, while the Inca foundations they had been built on top of stood untouched. Some of those foundations are still standing today, holding up the newer city above them. And Machu Picchu is not even the most extreme example. A short distance away, at sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, the Inca moved and fitted stones that dwarf anything at Machu Picchu, single blocks weighing not tons but well over 100 tons, hauled from quarries on other mountainsides, across rivers, and up slopes, and set into walls with the same seamless precision. No wheel. No iron. No horses. We do not fully know how they did it. What we do know is that this was not luck, and it was not crude. It was a mature engineering tradition, refined over generations, that we are still reverse engineering today. But raising perfect walls was only part of what the Inca were doing on this mountain. Because Machu Picchu was not just a monument. It was a machine. Chapter 3. Machine on the mountain. A city on a remote peak has a problem that a city on a plain does not. Everything it needs to survive has to work on the mountain, in thin air, on a slope, cut off from easy supply. Food. Water. Time itself. And Machu Picchu was engineered to solve all three. Start with water, the thing that could have destroyed it. The same rain that threatened to wash the city away was also captured and put to work. A spring on the mountain above was tapped, and a stone channel, a canal barely a hand wide, carries that water down into the heart of the city, dropping through a chain of 16 carved stone fountains, one flowing into the next. The gradient was calculated so carefully that the water arrives with just enough flow to fill a jar cleanly at each basin, without splashing or running dry. 1,000 feet up a mountain, with no pumps and no pipes as we know them, the Inca built a working aqueduct that still runs when it rains. Engineers who study it today find the slope of that little channel almost perfectly judged, as if it had been designed with instruments the Inca never had. Then there is food. Those terraces that stabilize the slope were also farmland. The Inca stacked the mountainside with agricultural platforms, filled with imported soil, warmed by the sun and drained by the stone beneath, creating flat fields where there had only been cliff. On these terraces they grew maize and potatoes, and because each level sits at a slightly different height and temperature, the terraces acted like a staircase of microclimates, letting them experiment with crops from different environments in one place. A city that could, in large part, feed itself in the clouds. And then there is the sky. The Inca were meticulous watchers of the heavens, and Machu Picchu is threaded with astronomy. There is a carved stone called the Intihuatana, shaped from the living bedrock, whose angles line up with the movement of the sun. Its name is often translated as the hitching post of the sun, and around the solstices its shadows shrink and stretch in ways the Inca watched closely, reading the calendar off a single carved rock. There is a curved building known as the Temple of the Sun, with windows positioned so that on the morning of the June solstice, sunlight falls precisely through one opening and strikes a sacred stone inside. Stand there at dawn on the right day and the mountain itself tells you the season, in a beam of light aimed by people who had no clocks and no telescopes. Run your eye across the ruins and the numbers start to sink in. Machu Picchu holds around 200 structures, hundreds of terraces, temples, homes, storehouses, and stairways, more than 100 separate flights of steps, many of them cut from a single block of stone. Every one of them had to be planned, quarried, shaped, and fitted, by hand, on the side of a cliff. The city is not just placed on the mountain. It is aligned with the sun, the seasons, and the sacred peaks around it, turning the whole site into a kind of calendar and temple in one. Put it together and Machu Picchu is not a pile of pretty ruins. It is an integrated machine, foundation, drainage, water supply, farming, and astronomy, all designed together, all working as one system, on the top of a mountain, by people we so casually call primitive. Which brings us to the hardest question of all. If they could do all this, then why did they walk away from it? And why did the world come to believe it had ever been lost? Chapter 4. The Question in the Clouds. Here is the truth that undoes the legend. Machu Picchu was never a lost city. The popular image, the one sold on posters and in films, is of an explorer hacking through the jungle in 1911 to reveal a city no one had seen for centuries. The explorer was Hiram Bingham, and he did bring Machu Picchu to the world's attention. But when he arrived, he did not find an empty, forgotten ruin. He found local Quechua families farming the terraces and living among the stones. They knew exactly where it was. They had never lost it. Their names were already written on one of the walls before Bingham ever climbed up. Machu Picchu was lost only to outsiders. And that single word, lost, quietly rewrote the story. It turned a place that local people had always known into a mystery for others to discover, and it turned a deliberate, sophisticated act of engineering into an accident waiting to be stumbled upon. So what really happened here? The best evidence suggests Machu Picchu was built around the middle of the 1400s, most likely as a royal estate for the Inca Emperor Pachacuti, the ruler who transformed the Inca from a small kingdom into the largest empire the Americas had ever seen. It was a retreat and a religious center rather than a common town, a place for the emperor, his household, and priests, not a city of the masses. It was never home to more than perhaps a few hundred to around 1,000 people. And it was never isolated, either. Machu Picchu was tied into the vast Inca road network, tens of thousands of miles of engineered trails and rope bridges that bound the empire together, running along cliffs and overpasses to reach it. The famous trek tourists now walk to the site follows one of those original Inca roads. The city in the clouds was remote, but it was never cut off. It was a deliberate node in a continent-spanning system. It was probably abandoned about a century after it was built, not through some dramatic catastrophe on the mountain, but because the empire that sustained it fell. When the Spanish conquest shattered the Inca state, the roads, the labor, and the reason for a remote royal estate all vanished. The people simply left, and the cloud forest quietly closed over the stones. No curse. No panic. No mystery of a vanished people. Just a masterpiece that outlived the world that needed it. And that is the real reason Machu Picchu matters. Not because it was lost, but because of what its survival tells us. That a civilization with no iron, no wheel, no mortar, and no writing built a city that could shrug off earthquakes, water and feed itself on a cliff, and track the sun across the sky, and did it so well that it is still standing centuries after the people who could have explained it were gone. We like to measure the ancient world by what it lacked. Machu Picchu measures us instead. It asks why, when we find something this precise and this deliberate, our first instinct is to call it lost, primitive, or mysterious, rather than simply admit that people we underestimated were quietly better at something than we are. The Inca left their answer carved into the top of a mountain, fitted so tightly that not even a blade of grass has found its way between the stones in 500 years. The city was never lost. We were just not paying attention.